Your dashboard looks alive on launch day, clean charts, fresh numbers, executive smiles. But decay starts the moment you publish it because the whole model depends on someone opening it, scanning it, and spotting the problem before the moment passes. That's the break. Most BI still runs on pull. People check data when they remember or when they have time or when they already suspect something is wrong. But high-value decisions usually don't fail because the chart didn't exist. They fail because nobody looked at it at the right time. So the shift isn't from one report style to another. It's from static reporting to notification architecture where Power BI, Power Automate, Dataverse, and AI work together to push action when context changes. Because if you keep building dashboards as the end product, you're not funding visibility. You're funding delay, the death of the data graveyard. A dashboard usually dies in a very boring way. It doesn't end with a technical failure or some dramatic outage. It dies because work moves on and conditions change, while the dashboard stays exactly where it was, sitting in a tab and waiting to be visited. What looked like visibility slowly turns into storage. That's why I call it a data graveyard. The flaw isn't the chart design, it's the assumption behind it. You're assuming that people will stop what they're doing, go looking for insight, and then translate that insight into action fast enough for it to matter. In most organizations, that doesn't happen. People are already buried in tools, meetings, approvals, and chat threads. Analytics becomes just another place to check, and once it becomes another chore, it becomes optional. Research on dashboard fatigue points in that direction. Workplaces already run across huge app counts, and that constant switching adds stress. One study in enterprise settings tied digital overload and burnout together, with employees dealing with more than 100 apps on average. Another finding that matters here is that dashboard use often falls hard after launch. Some research on automated BI put utilization around 20% after 6 months, which shows the problem isn't getting a dashboard live, but getting it used when timing matters. And that timing part is everything. If a finance lead needs to notice a budget drift or an operations manager needs to catch an SLA risk, a passive screen creates lag by default. You navigate, you search, you compare, then maybe you act. That sequence sounds normal because we've accepted it for years, but it's a slow sequence. It turns awareness into a manual task. Executives don't need more views, they need fewer missed moments. That's a different requirement. A dashboard is good at exploration. It can help you inspect trends, compare segments, and ask follow-up questions. But it doesn't intervene. It doesn't interrupt the day when a decision has started to go off track. It just waits there, hoping someone checks in before the issue gets bigger. So what teams call stale dashboards are often stale operating models. You can redesign the page, you can clean up colors, you can reduce KPI clutter. That may help a little, but if the system still depends on memory and manual review, the basic weakness stays put. Data rot is not mainly a design problem, it's an operating problem. The information might be fresh in the model and still be useless in practice because nobody gets pulled into action at the right time. And this is where the conversation needs to change. The question is no longer how do we build a better dashboard page. The better question is what business moment deserves intervention, who owns that moment, and how should the system respond when it starts to drift. Once you look at it that way, the old pull model stops looking mature. It starts looking incomplete. So if the old model is pull, the next step is defining the push model clearly. The shift from dashboards to event thinking. Once you see the pull model for what it is, the next shift becomes obvious. You have to stop starting with pages and start starting with events. That sounds like a small tweak, but it changes the entire strategy. Page-first thinking asks what charts we should show, how we should group them, and who gets access to the file. Event-first thinking asks a much harder question, which is what specific change in the business actually deserves a response. Not a view, a response. This means you stop organizing your BI work around reports and start organizing it around moments. A budget threshold breaks, a delivery slips outside of tolerance, or an approval sits on a desk for too long. Maybe a churn signal rises, or a data loss pattern appears where an unusual variance shows up. Those are not just reporting artifacts, they are operating moments, and that is the shift. Most teams build information products as if the user's main job is interpretation. But in real work, people are usually not sitting around waiting to interpret data because they are busy in a call, approving spend, or trying to unblock a team. What helps them is not another page with another slicer. What helps is a system that notices the deviation and pushes the right context directly into the flow of work. To design that well, you need a simple structure for every event. First, you define the signal to show exactly what changed. Then you define the threshold to decide at what point it matters enough to interrupt someone. You need an owner who is actually responsible for acting, and a route so the message appears where it has the best chance of being used. Finally, you need a response. You have to know what should happen next, right away. If the event is real. If one of those pieces is missing, the whole system gets weak fast. This clicked for me when I stopped asking whether a dashboard looked complete and started asking whether a business issue had an owner and a root. A lot of reporting work feels finished when the visuals are polished, even though the actual decision path is still undefined. The chart may be accurate, but The operating system around it is still vague. And vague systems are slow systems. There's also a massive difference between awareness and intervention. Awareness means someone could know something if they went looking for it. Intervention means the system enters the work at the exact moment the issue starts to matter. Those are not the same thing, and a lot of BI programs accidentally blur them together. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Dashboards support exploration, but event systems support decision velocity. That matters at the executive layer more than anywhere else. Senior leaders do not need a larger review ritual, but they do need less friction between a signal and an action. The value here is not just better visibility, it is a shorter time to pay out and faster exception handling. It creates a lower mental load because nobody has to keep polling for trouble across 10 different places. Research on decision-making backs this up. Only a small share of organizations think they are actually good at making decisions quickly, even after spending huge amounts on BI. The issue isn't access to data by itself. The issue is whether intelligence shows up in time with enough meaning for someone to act without another round of searching. That is why event thinking is stronger. It removes the search step. Once you remove the search step, you start designing systems that fit how work happens now. Context appears inside teams, approvals, tasks, or escalations instead of waiting inside a dashboard tab for a weekly review. But there is a trap here. A lot of teams see this shift and then they build basic threshold alerts everywhere and call it progress. That usually creates a second problem that is just as bad as the first one. Why most alert strategies fail. The first version of proactive reporting usually goes wrong in a very predictable way. A team realizes dashboards are too passive, so they start adding alerts on top of the existing data. Revenue drops below a certain number, queue length rises above a limit, or spend crosses a fixed line. For a week or two, it feels better because messages are moving and people think they have modernized the model. Then the noise starts. What looked proactive turns into another stream people learn to ignore because most alerts are built on raw numbers without enough business meaning. A number moved, but the system doesn't explain if anyone should care right now. Is this normal for this hour, this day, or this customer segment? A threshold by itself cannot answer that. That is where basic alerting breaks. If you trigger on raw variance without context, you get false urgency. A backlog might rise every Monday morning, or an approval queue might spike right before the month ends. None of those should create the same level of interruption as a true exception, but weak alert models treat them as equal because they do not understand patterns or consequences. And users learn fast. If 6 alerts out of 10 do not need action, the 7th alert starts losing trust before it is even opened. The thing most people miss is that alert fatigue does not come only from volume. It comes from ambiguity. People can handle an interruption when the message is clear. What they cannot handle is a steady stream of messages that dump the interpretation back on them. If the recipient has to stop, open 3 systems, and guess the cause, the notification did not remove friction. It just relocated it. That means a red badge is not enough. A good notification has to do more work before it reaches a person. It should explain what changed, why it matters now, and what action path is expected. Without those details, you are not sending operational intelligence. You are just sending unfinished homework. This is also why anomaly detection matters more than a lot of teams think. Static thresholds are blunt tools that ignore trends and baseline behavior. Research around AI Builder anomaly detection points to a better pattern here because dynamic baselines can reduce false positives. It is not perfect, but it is better in environments where normal moves around. There is another failure point that shows up later. Teams build alerts, but they never define the response path. The system can spot a problem and post to teams, but then nothing happens because nobody agreed on what happens next. There is no task, no approval, and no audit trail. It is just a message hanging in a chat. That is not architecture, that is leakage. If you want notifications to work, each one needs a specific job. It has to detect, explain, route, trigger, and track. The message itself should be one part of a controlled flow rather than the whole solution. The design rule is simple, and it is stricter than most teams expect. Every notification should answer 4 things before it ships. What changed, why now, who owns it, and what happens next. Once you build with that rule, alerting starts acting less like system noise and more like a managed intervention. That changes what the architecture has to carry because the hard part is no longer sending messages. The hard part is carrying context inside the message. The proactive notification blueprint. So what does the architecture actually look like when you stop thinking in terms of reports and start thinking in terms of intervention? You need 6 layers and each layer does a different job. Source systems, event detection, AI reasoning, orchestration, delivery, feedback. Start with the source systems because this is where many teams get confused. The goal is not to replace your operational systems with one giant alert engine. The goal is to watch the systems that already hold the truth. ERP, CRM, service data, security signals, finance records, inventory movements, case updates, Power BI can sit on top of those sources and help model the signals, but it should stop being treated as the place where the process ends. In this model, Power BI becomes a sensor. That's an important change. You still use it to shape metrics, compare states, and expose patterns. You still use it for analysis and exploration. But when a business condition crosses from observation into action, the output should move beyond the report surface. So instead of asking people to keep returning to a dashboard, you use that analytical layer to help identify a business event worth acting on. Then you need event detection. Some events are simple. A value crosses a known tolerance. An approval is overdue. A case sits untouched too long. Others need more judgment. The pattern looks unusual, but only relative to trend or expected behavior. This is where AI reasoning starts to matter, because not every useful signal lives inside a fixed threshold. AI Builder anomaly detection and Power BI AI features can help spot unusual patterns, while Copilot-based reasoning can help summarize, classify, or explain what just happened in plain language. That doesn't replace governance. It gives the flow a better first pass before a human sees it. After detection and reasoning, the center of gravity shifts to Power Automate. This is the orchestration layer, not just the message sender, the conductor. It decides what flow runs, what system gets updated, whether approval is needed, whether a task should be created, whether an escalation should happen, and what conditions suppress duplicate noise. If Power BI notices, Power Automate acts. That's the split. Now that action needs memory. Without state, notification systems get messy fast. You don't know what was sent, who acted, whether the case is still open, whether the issue was dismissed, or whether the same alert keeps reappearing with no learning built in. That's where Dataverse earns its place. It gives you a place to store notification history, workflow status, owner changes, escalation state, retry outcomes, and audit detail. So the flow is not just firing and forgetting, it is tracking. And once you track state, routing gets smarter. Not every event belongs in the same channel. A CFO budget exception may need an approval flow. A frontline service issue may need a Teams post plus a task. A risky compliance pattern may need an incident record and a secure route for follow-up. A senior leader may only need a one-line alert with a confidence summary and a decision prompt. The route depends on role, urgency, and what kind of action the event is asking for. That's why delivery is its own layer. Teams, email, approval workflows, planner tasks, incidents, escalations, even external systems, they are not the architecture. They are endpoints. Pick them based on response behavior, not based on what connector feels easiest. If the person who needs to act lives in Teams all day, route there. If the action needs traceable approval, use the approval path. If the issue belongs in a managed queue, create the case directly. Delivery should fit the work pattern already in place. One level deeper, the part most teams skip is feedback. Did the recipient act? Was the alert useful? Was it noise? Was the issue confirmed, dismissed, reassigned, or escalated? If you don't capture that outcome, the system stays blind. It keeps notifying with no memory of value. The better model is closed loop. Detect the signal, route the context, capture the result, then tune the rules, the summaries, and the routes based on what led to action and what didn't. That's how notification architecture starts acting like an operating layer instead of a collection of flows. And once that model is clear, the next question gets practical fast. Where do you start without turning this into an overbuilt automation project on day one? High-value use cases that justify the shift. So where do you apply this first? Not everywhere. That's usually the mistake. Start where a late decision already costs money, trust, or control. Finance is one of the clearest places. A dashboard can show budget drift after the fact, but a notification flow can intervene while there's still room to respond. Say a cost center moves outside expected variance, the system can detect the change, attach the last approved baseline, route it to the budget owner, and trigger an approval or review path right away. Same with cash flow movement. Same with exception approvals. The point is not to admire the variance. The point is to shorten the path from detection to financial action. Operations works the same way, just with different pressure points. Stock issues, backlog movement, and SLA breach risk all decay fast when nobody owns the moment early enough. If an item drops below safe stock, a team doesn't need another report tab. They need the current level, the affected product or region, the likely consequence, and the route to replenish or escalate. If an SLA is drifting, the flow should identify the queue, the owner, the age of the work, and what action closes the gap before the breach lands. Security and compliance are even more dependent on timing. In those areas, people already know raw alert volume can get out of hand, so value comes from better triage, not just faster messaging. A risky behavior pattern, a DLP signal, or an insider risk case needs more than a warning. It needs enough context for the right team to decide whether this is noise, policy tuning, or a real investigation. We've already seen that tuned proactive models in Microsoft environments can reduce high-severity DLP events and cut response time for insider risk teams. That only happens when the route and the action path are built in from the start. Service teams are another strong fit because sentiment and handoff failures often hide inside normal reporting until the issue spreads. If negative feedback starts clustering around one process, one account group, or one service step, a summary alert can surface the shift before churn shows up in the quarterly review. If a handoff fails between teams, the system can flag the stuck case, attach the customer context, assign ownership, and move it back into motion. That's the difference between seeing a trend later and correcting a customer experience while it still matters. And at the executive level, the use case gets simpler, not bigger. Leaders rarely need another ritual where they open 10 views and hunt for meaning. What they need is a small number of one-line decision alerts that say what changed, why it needs attention, and what decision is sitting in front of them now. Research on executive decision-making points the same way. Very few organizations think they're good at making decisions quickly, and one reason is that information arrives as volume instead of direction. So, when you choose your first use case, force the design through 4 filters: trigger, context, owner, action path. If any one of those is fuzzy, don't automate it yet, because the right place to start isn't where the data looks interesting, it's where the delay already hurts. Governance, limits, and cost control. Once teams see a few notification flows working, they usually want to scale fast. That is the right instinct, but this is also where sloppy architecture starts getting expensive. First, you have to plan for metered AI use. In 2026, AI builder credit models are shifting toward co-pilot credit models, and that changes how you think about cost. You cannot treat AI summarization or reasoning steps like free decoration inside every flow. They need budgets, environment allocation, and constant monitoring. Power Platform gives you capacity reporting in the admin center, and you need to use it. Monthly resets and delayed reporting can hide overuse until a massive bill shows up at your door. Then there are the delivery limits. If Teams is your main endpoint, payload size and request volume matter more than most people expect. Adaptive cards in Teams run into a 28 kilobyte payload limit, and standard posts have their own size constraints. Request limits in Power Platform and Teams throttling can also hit you when one design gets copied across dozens of flows. A notification pattern that works fine in a pilot can start failing quietly once volume rises, especially when every branch posts messages and updates records in parallel. That is why low code is enough until it isn't. If your flow volume is moderate and the response path stays inside Microsoft 365, Power Automate plus Dataverse can carry a lot. But if you need high-volume scheduling or burst handling across thousands of notifications, this is where Azure Functions or Service Bus start to make sense. It is not because low-code failed, but because the workload changed. The model should stay simple for as long as it can, then separate when throughput or reliability demands it. There is also a more basic form of waste to control. You have to watch for duplicate alerts, dead alerts, and ownerless alerts. If a condition keeps firing after someone already acted, you need to suppress it. If nobody has responded to an alert type in 60 days, it is time to review it. If routing keeps landing in the wrong place, fix the route instead of adding another message. Good governance is less about publishing standards and more about keeping the system clean after launch. You should measure response rates, track dismissals, and watch escalations to see which notifications lead to action and which ones just create traffic. So the rule is simple. Notifications are products, not side effects. They need owners, they need maintenance, they need lifecycle reviews, and they need cost visibility, because a noisy system burns money twice. It burns money once in platform consumption, and it burns it again in human attention. So keep the dashboard, but change its job. Use dashboards for exploration, trend review, and deeper analysis. Do not treat them as the final operating surface. Move action into notification flows, where the system can detect change, root context, and trigger the next step without waiting for someone to go look. If you want to start tomorrow, pick one decision that still depends on somebody checking a chart. Map the event, the owner, the root, and the response. If this changed how you think, subscribe to M365 FM, leave a review, and connect with Mirko Peters on LinkedIn.